Afternoon, everybody. It is officially 2 o'clock, so I'm going to slowly get us going here and get us officially started with our Healthy Food Systems Policy webinar. So thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just a quick note, we are recording this officially starting now. We are recording the webinar. So welcome and good Thursday afternoon to everybody. I really wish I could see your faces. I'm so glad so many of you are with us today. My name is Wendy Peters-Muschetti. I get to work at Nourish Colorado. And welcome to our Healthy Food Systems Policy webinar, our very literally named Healthy Food Systems Policy webinar. Again, so glad you are with us today. At my role at Nourish is I do get to work with a lot of our state and federal policy advocacy work, so I get to moderate this webinar today. As you are all coming in and getting settled, I just wanted to give you a really just a quick update about who we are at Nourish Colorado. In case you have not seen or heard about our rebrand, we were formerly Live Well Colorado. We are now rebranded as Nourish Colorado. So again, if this is new to you, like who we are, who are these people hosting this webinar, please go check us out at nourishcolorado.org, and you can read all about us there. Just a really quick note though, sort of about us, who we are, our North Star at Nourish Colorado is to work with all of you to make sure that each and every Coloradan has equitable and abundant access to nourishing foods. And again, you can read sort of more about that and who we are and what we do on our website. Welcome to our third webinar. This is part of a sort of a winter webinar series of 3. The first one we held was around healthy food incentives, and then we had a conversation around healthy food and institutions, and now we're shifting to focus on policy work. All 3 of these have and are being recorded, and we will, after today, we will be sending out sort of the package of all 3 recordings, and please share those widely. They will be on our YouTube channel as well. So I gotta tell you, this is by far the most popular webinar we have ever hosted or planned. As Live Well Colorado or Nourish Colorado, we had over 350 registrants for this webinar. So policy is so sexy. Who knew on a Thursday afternoon? I always thought so, but I'm really glad that you all think so too. And I gotta say, with so many of you, I see you logging in now and so many registered people who are gonna watch this. I wish we had 2 hours together. I wish I could hear from each and every one of you, like, who are you and why are you here and what are you seeking and what do you think we're gonna talk about? We have no time for that this hour, but I do wanna encourage you to just stay on until the end of this hour, because we are gonna share some ways at the end of this hour about how to stay involved, how to stay engaged, how to stay together through this work. So I really do want to hear more about you all on the line today and why you're here with us. It also sort of got me thinking, like, wow, policy, like who knew this would be like kind of break Zoom for us webinar conversation. Kind of got me thinking about, like, I'm in meetings and rooms all the time where we talk about policy and we talk about what does policy mean and like big P policy and little p policy and what are we talking about. And I finally, for the first time in my life, looked up the actual definition of policy last night. And I was really intrigued by this. So the first documented use in the English language of the word policy was in the 15th century. And it was meant to mean prudence or wisdom in the management of affairs, often referring to governance or codes of conduct or behavior. And the first thing I thought was, wow, we have like several hundred years under our belts of policies that have been neither prudent nor wise, that have been downright oppressive, right? That have been used to strip people of human and civil liberties, that have been racist or misogynistic in nature and in creation. And we have this history of policies that have actually been used to help build, as a tool, right, to help build the world that we all want to see. And that is what we get to talk about here together with this incredible panel. How can we use this tool that we refer to as policy, whether it's the local level or the state level or the federal level, how can we use this as a tool to help build a food system that nourishes each and every one of us? So I'm going to stop talking, and I'm so excited to soon pass it over to our incredible panelists today. We're going to have we have some set questions for each of our panelists, And then we're gonna have some time for Q&A at the end. And then wrap it up again with some ways that we can all stay involved and engaged in this work together. So please, as you go, please chat in questions in the chat or the Q&A, wherever you're at, as you go. We are doing Q&A at the end. And please, if you can, if you know, please put in the name of the person that you are directing your question to. So without further ado, I'm not going to go into depth in the bios. Please, if you have not had a chance to read the bios, they were in the Eventbrite. If you just feel like you need some inspiration to like be the person you really wish you were, like go read these people's bios because they will inspire you. Together, collectively, our panelists have worked literally all over the world. They worked inside of government, outside of government, as political appointees, as resident activists. They've been educated in prestigious universities and educated in, with, and by community. And they bring deep experience in nutrition, water, farm and food workers, actually growing food, and so much more. So our speakers are Fatima Ahmad, co-founder, executive director, head farmer, Frontline Farming. Kate Greenberg, Colorado Commissioner of Agriculture.
Did you lose me? Yeah. Can you hear me now?
You were on the commissioner.
Sorry, it just hung up on me. That has never happened. Of course, that has never happened. But here it did today. Anyway, Kate Greenberg, Colorado Commissioner of Agriculture, Kumar Chandran, Senior Advisor for Nutrition, the Office of the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture, and Monique Marez, the Project Coordinator for the Pueblo Food Project. Thank you so much for giving up your time today. So I'd like you all now to do within 1 minute is introduce yourself, your role in policy, your interactions with policy, and really why are you like passionate about policy and systems change. And we're gonna go in this order from Monique to Fatima to Kate to Kumar. So thank you and welcome.
All right, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Monique Marez, as mentioned. Currently the coordinator for the Pueblo Food Project, but have several years of experience doing international trade policy work, specifically for organic agriculture, and lots of time doing food systems change in communities across the country.
Hi, good afternoon, all you people out there. My name is Fatima Ahmad. I'm the Executive Director of Frontline Farming. I serve at the pleasure of our membership as the President of Mile High Farmers and on the African American Commission, and also work as a Professor of Environmental Justice. At Frontline Farming, we do have an ethics to approaching our work on policy and just food systems. We approach it through a framing of security, justice, and sovereignty. We know that providing direct and emergency food doesn't really solve the issues, but that we need to meet people where they are. And we see justice work as a limited concept in a way in which we're asking the same systems that have historically oppressed us to grant us basic rights. And so when we think of like the USDA programs that discriminated against Black farmers and contributed to the rate of Black farmer loss from 14% in the 1930s to less than 1% now, justice doesn't really help us in policy that often in resetting the table. We know that policy work is important to engage in, but we also think a lot about how we can create new systems and make greater demands for change, and think about different ways of modeling that through works of liberation and sovereignty and growing our own foods and farms. So thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Kate Greenberg, the Colorado Commissioner of Agriculture. Entering my third year in this post, but prior to this was organizing with the National Young Farmers Coalition out of Durango. Came on in the early days of the coalition as we were building the national coalition and really leveraging the voices of young farmers and ranchers to change policy at the state and federal level. It's been a continuation of that work into this role inside government now. I get a taste of my own medicine when on the outside I got to tell people what I thought they should do. Now I get to go try and do it and be responsive as possible to our ag community. So it's great to be with you all here today.
Hi everyone, good afternoon. Thank you for having me. And it's Great. Can you hear me?
It's a little quiet, Kumar.
Oh, let me see. Is that better?
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay. Great. So thank you again for having me. Good to be with you all. My name is Kumar Chandran. I am recently at USDA. I've been on board for just over a month as Wendy said, Senior Advisor for Nutrition. Prior to that, worked at Food Corps, where I worked with Wendy through the National Sustainable Agriculture Coalition, and have worked on food policy at various levels prior to that. And in fact, my first job, I worked for an organization that is recently rebranded as Nourish California. So there's a little franchise of Nourish states, which would be great. You know, if every state had one, that's great. So yeah, I mean, I think in terms of why I'm interested in policy, I just see it as a way to make change at scale and achieve the goals that we want to achieve at scale. So looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you all. So Kumar, actually, you're going to keep the mic. So the first question I'm going to ask of Kumar is just thinking about the current situation today, right? And you think about, policies that can support resilient food systems that equitably provide nourishing food for all. What seems to be going on that's really effective? And what is everything that we're doing that we should really stop doing?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So, I think that something that I find heartening right now is seeing that a lot of organizations, just a lot of people generally are thinking about how to bring an equity lens to the work that they're doing. And I think that, obviously lots of organizations have been doing it for a long time, but I feel like there's more of a momentum behind it, particularly given recent events. And I think that, I've been pleasantly surprised that has continued. I think oftentimes you see there's an interest in something and then it sort of goes away. But I feel like it's continued. Obviously, there's still work to do, but I think the fact that it is continuing, I find encouraging. And I think that thinking about the work that I'm doing now, the pandemic has impacted food insecurity and raised levels of food insecurity and hunger so much, and seeing how we can provide an effective response to that, both from USDA's perspective and then also working through states to implement programs, really learning about what are ways to deliver programs in ways that are responsive to the current situation, and recognizing just the differences that are across this country. I think in terms of something to stop doing, I was reflecting on this question when you sent it in advance, and I've actually found this one a hard one to answer. But so I think I'm going to twist it a little bit, which is maybe not something. I think something that we should be doing more of, right? So is to do more listening and to do more outreach, and to try to listen to a different range of stakeholders than we normally do. And I use the we broadly, right? Both like in my current job, but that is something that I'm interested in. But I think we can all do that. So I guess we should stop being too focused, so broaden our approach and just trying to listen to as many people as we can.
Thank you for that and for being here, Kumar. So I'm going to ask a fairly similar question to Commissioner Greenberg next. So again, Commissioner, thinking about work to promote resilient and equitable food systems, what are you most proud of right now that the state of Colorado is doing, and where do you think we could be doing better?
Well, I think it's hard for me to answer that question outside of our COVID response, for starters, because so much of this has now been organized around, what vulnerabilities have emerged. And I don't say emerge as in out of the ether, right? I think we had a sense of what those vulnerabilities were. And certainly the pandemic has exacerbated that, really shone a light on some of those parts of our food system where we've seen breakdowns in supply chains, we've seen breakdowns in food access in pretty remarkable ways. So kind of where my mind's at is how can we take what we've learned from this almost past 12 months and apply that to our policy decision making. It might not change the course we were on, but I think it's a helpful reflection knowing what we know now. So, in terms of what I'm proud of for the state response, from day one, we have at the Department of Ag, we set up a food supply chain task force and an ag recovery task force. So we were focused on how can we do our part to keep supply chains moving, to keep food getting to shelves, supporting people, organizations, food pantries, however we could, and how can we simultaneously be advocating for recovery even before the crisis had even peaked, really. So I think that dual thinking, it's how we think about a lot of emergencies, but this was a big one. Most emergencies we respond to last a few hours or a few days if it's a wildfire, or a few months if it's a drought, but not over a year plus. I think the food security, as Kumar mentioned, the food security devastation we've seen throughout the pandemic has hit hard. I mean, we are in the sort of middle of trying to figure out what role do we play as an agency, but the state as a whole, of course, is organizing around this question of food security, access, and then the larger question of resilience as well. And that's where our framing around how do we move forward is economic and supply chain resilience, food security as a tool of resilience, and supporting our communities where all the workers across food and ag supply chain have the support, the health, the safety they need to continue to do the work they do to get food to the table. I think all of those are where we can do more, and that's where we're pushing. We're pushing on rural infrastructure investments for ag. We're pushing on expanding marketing opportunities to diversify our ag business opportunities across the state, pushing on that connection for food security, so much work to do there, and then really doing our own inner work about how to apply the equity lens to our work as a department. This is a place that is new to us as a state agency in terms of using it as a framework, and I think we just have so much much work to do here, good, positive, meaningful, critical work, and I'm humbled to be able to lead us through this time and those questions as we continue our advocacy moving ahead.
Thank you, and we are very glad you are in that position doing that. And thanks for being here today, Kate. My next question, Monique, is for you. As you are very aware, the Pueblo Food Project is incredibly active and quickly emerging as a model for local food coalition building across the state and across the country. What have you found is the most powerful change that you can make at the local level that really cannot happen at the state or the national level?
Yeah, I think one of the biggest differences at the local level compared to the state or national level is the ability to really do the listening that Kumar had mentioned. You get the opportunity to engage with folks who are breathing the reality day in, day out, and you are part of that community, and you really get to experience the challenges and the successes that you're facing together. And that enables you to tell a story in a very different way than, a nice wrapped up policy language gets you to do. And one of the most important things that I think we have to do at the local level to create effective policies for our communities is really build the confidence of individual community members, especially young people, to participate in advocacy and policy change. A lot of times we find folks that are able to verbalize their challenges and frustrations, but when it comes to sharing those thoughts in front of a larger room or understanding how to pull themes out across community concerns and represent that to decision makers, people get a little bit nervous. And so at the local level, we really have the duty to build that confidence, create that voice, amplify it. And I think that's one of the most important things that we're working on at the Pueblo Food Project is to say every coalition member's experience and voice matters, and whatever you need to express that, we're going to help you get there. So really focusing on skills and appreciation for people having courage to speak up for what they want.
Thank you, Monique. I must say you two are all being very aware and cognizant of time, which is lovely, but also feel free to keep going. So Fatima, you work at so many levels across the food system, a farmer, an activist, and you see this work from so many angles. Tell us more about who you see as well represented in policy work and where we have serious gaps in representation. Thank you.
Thanks, Wendy. So yeah, according to the Colorado Health Foundation Ecosystem Survey that came out this year for Colorado, we know that most organizations that work for Latinx communities are not represented by Latin leadership, and that particularly organizations that serve Black communities lack Black leadership, and we have a serious deficit in that in Colorado. It is really difficult to see that at leadership level, and it gets even worse when we look at boards. We also know from that survey that organizations run by POC do not engage in policy work at the same level as other organizations, but are way more involved in direct action work. And I can sort of implicitly understand why. It's our own communities that are affected, and particularly in the pandemic, we've just seen so many of our BIPOC leaders just being so spread thin and having to serve their communities at every level. I believe that as food movement people, we're often lacking the metrics that truly help us understand system changes, and instead we focus on individual choices. And that happens in health with the golden standard of like individualized, randomized tests and different things like that. We're just exhausted of hearing about obesity in our communities or our eating habits. The interventions then become really individually focused. When we look at data around environmental justice, we see that this has been long recorded that 3 out of 4 waste sites across the nation are sited in Black communities, not because Black communities moved there, but because they got sited in those Black communities. We suffer the highest asthma and lead poisoning rates. This isn't about individual choices. If we know and we understand that the food apartheid system here in the United States particularly exists in communities of color and those who are economically disenfranchised, we're still quick to label these neighborhoods as food deserts, and yet don't collect the metrics about the actual systems and institutional actors that perpetuate this. So I think what I find difficult is how the experience of Black and Brown people are often relegated to qualitative data and history. Data can and is often used against us, and there's so much work around data that we have to do for ourselves, and we have to find ways of raising up traditional knowledge and storytellers. I want us here today to reflect on the concept of what we think about who are knowers and what is known. I think that when we exclude whole communities from data, we're really limiting an accurate view of the world and our capacity to really make accurate predictions and interventions. We often say that the food system is broken, but in reality, it's really operating at the most maximal level of capitalist economics. What has been so difficult to see as the food system has not served our populations, and this has been really shored up with COVID, particularly for our farmers and ag workers and communities of color, is that we still go back to the same so-called experts to get us out of these problems. And so, a lot of times people think that when I'm talking about POC communities, that this is about representational politics, but it's really about us creating clearer views and that diversity that exists within our own societies and communities to actually serve ourselves in better ways. And the last thing that I would say is that on a metrics level for food movements people is that we really, really lack and don't record data around food workers. We focus on urban farms and all these different actors, but we really don't focus on the people who are making the food movement up and serve us in all those capacities. And the sad realities of that is that they're also often Black and Brown people. So thanks for the question, Wendy.
And thank you for sharing that. And I'm seeing a lot of love in the chat box, Fatima, for your acknowledgement too, that perhaps the food system is operating exactly as it is intended to be. And thank you for bringing people back to the forefront, right, of policy and data and all of these conversations. And Fatima, you're going to actually keep the mic for the next question. So the next question, it's the same question for all of you. And we're going to go Fatima and then Kate and then Kamar and Monique, but I can remind you as well. So this is just about looking forward and kind of setting the bar about where we want to be. And to your point, Fatima, thinking about sort of this means like what metrics and whose story and what data we're actually looking to, right, to move us forward. But so looking forward, I'd like you to imagine that it's 2030. Well, it will be 2030 someday. So it is 2030. And what amazing policies have passed that have led to the most abundant, thriving, equitable food system we have ever seen, if that's possible. I would love for you to spend like up to 4 minutes answering sort of what you think happens in the policy realm between now and 2030 to get us there. So Fatima, please take it away.
Thanks, Wendy. Yeah, it's funny with the 2030 question. I was like, oh my God, like so far in the future, because I have a hard time counting in the 2000s. It's just like, you know, a blur when you get to that age. So it's not that far off, but I do think that for me, like it really is hard as a farmer and a person of color, and with climate chaos and this pandemic, to really think farther than tomorrow and this next year and how to just get there. I think that what's been really hard and the changes that I would like to see that I know that we ourselves can't make happen is that it's so hard to go into these policy rooms where they're already stacked, where there is no representation of people of color, where there is no ag workers there, where there sometimes isn't farmers there, and yet the people from big industry are sitting there and we're doing all the work and they're critiquing it and saying, well, revise that, and maybe if you bring it back, we'll approve it. And it's like, who's gonna stand for the people who are the most vulnerable in those ways? And so it's really hard to not get discouraged and to know that these rooms weren't built for people that look like me, and the consequences that I deal with just by going into these spaces. And so it involves a lot of strategy and spiritual and mental fortitude to be able to occupy those spaces. And I think for us, myself and Dr. Damien Thompson, who's our co-founder, and other people on our team like Just Sun, Auguste, who is the BIPOC rep for the National Young Farmers. For us, we're just trying to break down those walls and create new paths for people to come behind us and to know that they have the support of us and that experience. So I think that, you know, the biggest things that we want to see is, you know, our relationships with land and just how we've excluded our indigenous communities. And when we look at our national park systems and Theodore Roosevelt and how these things were set up, and that these people were very much eugenicists by fact and racist themselves, and how a lot of our environmental imagery actually excluded all of these communities and people. And so I think that this narrative we have of environment that's very normative and set upon this Eurocentric view of what nature is highly problematic for us as a nation. And that until we can think about what the BIPOC experience for land has been, we're just not going to be in right relationship with humans or land itself. And so I think we have some serious reasoning to do. I think that another struggle, you know, that I would really like people to reflect on for the future for us as a nation is we often espouse values and say that we believe in a lot of values, but then when actual action happens, people get freaked out and really reactive, and that's because change is difficult and changing privileges is difficult. And one thing that I always try to tell people in policy rooms after they've gone and done so much work in it, and the policy gets shut down and they're like, these people didn't even do anything, they were just sitting there. And it's like, well, they were actually very effective. They maintained the status quo. That was really, really effective policy work. So I think there's a lot when we think about Dr. King and we shine him everywhere now. It's like he wasn't popular at that time. And if I gave his speech of on the mountaintop in a room today, people would lose it. That was after the Memphis sanitation strike workers, where Black people held up signs that said, "I am a man." And as I listened to those sanitation strike workers' recordings, it really struck me how similar they exactly were to the recordings I'm listening of meatpacking workers. And to still be in the same places that we've been, we have to ask ourselves what we can do to make that real substantive change. And of course, that's the same with climate chaos and the politicization of land, like we do with humans asking for basic rights. I think that the big frontier is the water wars. We haven't yet completely destroyed our water as humans, but we're entering those spaces, and that's becoming a serious struggle. And I just always reflect on how the policies that we refer to, you know, whether it's first rights or whatever, completely exclude the Indigenous people who are there. And so it's weird how we just skip over the violence of how these policies don't include those people. And so for me, really looking at water here as we go forward, and of course, I've been a soil worker for a long time now. So.
Thank you, Fatima. I think we just had a whole day worth of conversation coming out of everything you said here about everything that really we all need to work on together to get us to 2030 and beyond. So since no time to respond to all of those, thank you for sharing all of that. And I'm going to pass the same question to Kate. So again, imagine it's 2030 and what has really happened between now and 2030 to get us to the most thriving, equitable food system we've ever seen.
Yeah, this one, you know, I'm grateful, Fatima, for your words, and I struggle with this one too in some ways. I think, especially in the policy realm, we have to be working on a multi-year futurist, you know, being in the future, anchoring in what we are envisioning to become. But there's so much every single day just trying to get through, you know, especially in the last year. Pandemic, wildfire, drought, you know, et cetera, et cetera. But I think when I, you know, think about the next decade of work on the policy front, gosh, I mean, there's so many challenges, and it's hard to know where the starting place is. So I think, you know, it would need to be this simultaneous effort across the food system that I think so many folks are focusing on. You know, it's not just one line of effort, one strategy. It is this diversified, networked, multi-level effort across all lines of policy, from the local level to state and federal. You know, I come back to that diversification. I think we've seen, again, the vulnerabilities, the inequities in consolidation, when that goes too far, what that looks like for our food system, for food access, for workers, for consumers who are looking to source food from farmers and ranchers they know, for example. I have our Colorado Proud logo here because that's been such a driver for us this year, is really connecting people with the food that they eat and the people who grow and raise the food that they eat. You know, I think there's obviously, if we've got 2 in 5 families in Colorado experiencing food insecurity, we're going to have to focus in a serious way on the policy solutions for that in the next 10 years. You know, that's not going to be pandemic crisis is over, you know, and that alleviates, right? And we know that that issue was here before the pandemic as well. And as Fatima mentioned, that's systemic. That's not, you know, I just don't happen to have a grocery store within walking distance. It's much larger questions of access and equity. Water, I mean, you nailed it on the head when it comes to the future of an equitable, resilient food system. Our resource base is foundational, and that's, you know, where a lot of our focus is supporting the work that farmers and ranchers do, advancing the work of stewardship and production, and tying those two together so that food access, food production is not antithetical to stewardship. It never has been, but how can we tell that story to a larger population so that this trend that we see of buy and dry, of massive development of farmers for one reason or another losing ground. how can we reverse that trend? That's what I would like to see on the resource policy side, is that we as a state, despite our population growth, recognize that rural Colorado, that our agricultural base in Colorado, and that every single person who works the land and who understands how to manage water and how to care for soil and how to grow and raise food for people is recognized as an integral part of the state's fabric, and not something that's anachronistic, something that's sort of just fading off into the sunset. I hope that we strengthen our reliance on rural Colorado and take policy actions, especially around water in particular, that show how much ag, the land, water, the people who work the land are integral to who we are as a state.
Thank you for setting forward a bit of a change path for us. I know it's one that you're actively working on right now and will be for many more years, Kate. So thank you for sharing that with us. So next, same question to Kumar.
Yeah. So I think as kind of as Kate referenced, I 2030. I saw the question and I was like, oh my gosh, 2030. It seems like can't even think about tomorrow, let alone 2030. But then it's only 9 years away, right? It's not that far. So as I was thinking about this question, I don't know that I could sort of point to specific policies that I would say would be the ones that have passed in order to arrive at an abundant, thriving, equitable food system. But I was thinking more about the process that we would go through in order to achieve that. And I've been thinking a lot about how sort of similar to Kate's response. Like right now, there's so much focus on the pandemic and the consequences that we've seen as a result of it, and it is almost trite at this point to say that the pandemic has just shown a light on underlying inequities. So given that, I think that we think about how to move forward, and thinking about that, achieving that 2030 vision, right? It requires us to learn, to take lessons from what we're going through right now, and apply them to the policies that we are able to pass, so that we're not just getting back to where we were in 2019, right? But 2019. But that we're right, lost track of time, right? But that we're and I find you say as the Biden administration calls it building back better, which is actually, I find, like a useful frame, even though they say it a lot, we say it a lot, to see how we can pass policies that are both responsive to the current moment, but also are laying the groundwork for the change that we want to see. So I think about that in the context of this question, in terms of like the process that we would go through in order to get those policies in motion. I also, as I referenced earlier, think about how we need to continue to apply an equity lens to how we come about with those policies, and both in terms of the process for formulating them, drafting them, but then also through the implementation of them, that they're being implemented in a way that keeps that in mind. And then I think the other thing, and I think Kate also sort of referenced this, is that there's the food policy. We could think about policies that change the food system, and we often think about policies that are sort of like, in our heads we think about as food policy, right? But a lot of those are contextualized within sort of a larger social or economic framework, right? And so if you think about food insecurity and hunger, right, those are oftentimes at least partly a consequence of labor policy and housing policy and things like that. And similarly, the broader food systems issues, I think I saw someone in the chat talking about development and things like that, right? So there's lots of other policies that we may not that are not immediately apparent as food policy, but that we would need to think about and bring into the fold, and think about how we use them to advance that broader goal.
Thank you for that, Tamar, and for pointing out that this is all very integrated. And food security is also about economic security and housing justice and environmental justice and all of it. Absolutely. Thank you for that. And Monique, same question to you.
Yeah. Similar to the other panelists, I had a hard time identifying one single policy that would, magic wand our situation, but a couple of things that I hope we can get to by then. First and foremost, that policy is understandable. There's these documents and these concepts tend to be very convoluted, if I may, and it's really challenging to understand what the actual goals are in some of the most pressing issues that we're dealing with the policies and the way that they're presented, put forward, voted on, written, et cetera. So I would hope that as we progress and our goals as a local community, statewide community become more clear for the food system that we want to see, that the policies themselves also become more clear and understandable for more people. Next, I would really hope that there's, as Fatima touched on it, but the food system right now is geared towards a capitalist structure. And I would hope that the policies that are in place by 2030 evaluate other metrics for success beyond commercial sales and development that are more focused on communities being able to live healthy, happy lives. Certainly there are ways that we can measure those things and really allow for that quality of life sentiment to be represented in the policy decisions that are being made. And it would be wonderful if we started to tip the scale, especially when it comes to our food system, to be more about experience and less about money in the bank. I know that's a tough one, especially as we ratchet up to the federal level, but at the end of the day, what are we doing this for? We're doing it because we want ourselves and our communities and our families to live healthy, happy lives. And it's really challenging to do that when you feel that goal is completely at odds with the market system. So how do we kind of reevaluate those metrics? The other thing that I would hope, and it ties into this representation piece, is a lot of times, as mentioned, the policy writers, the policy makers are completely separate from those that the policy is going to impact. I witnessed that a lot in my past life, especially in the organic movement. And it just makes sense that folks who are going to be impacted by the policy participate in the writing of that policy, and those opinions are represented and their ideas are taken to heart and they're part of the process. It's not just, oh, I'm flying in to tell you my story, but it's like, no, let's get in here and brainstorm this together. So I think that would be really important. And I think we can move in that direction. And on that piece, we need to start including young people. We need to take away the mysticism of how policy is created and the secrecy behind this process and say, young people, let's get you involved. This is how it works. What are your opinions? The Pueblo Food Project started a youth council, and every time a policy comes up that's related to food in some way, shape, or form, we kick it to them and we say, what do you think? And we just host a conversation about what they think. And you'd be amazed some of the really deep questions that come out of, come out of the group. And I think that just has to be built in. It can't be until after you graduate some university or someone's pressing you in a community setting to give an opinion that it's your first time thinking about how these things work. We can do a lot better job to just kind of creating that as part of the normal way you build the community you want to be involved. So those are some of the things that I would hope.
I love your hope. And that was more than just hope. That was clear and actionable, Monique. So thank you for that. And I love that you brought in the process again and the people and how we do this rather than just like this policy was passed by 2030. So thank you so much for bringing that perspective. And our last question, just sort of in 1 minute or less for each of you, and I see there's some questions that are kind of getting to this anyway, is what is one, they're speaking directly to the audience now. Tell us what to do, right? Tell us how we can do this. What is one thing, at least, that each and every one of us on the call here today can do to help get to what we're talking about in 2030? So starting, again, we'll go Fatima, Kate, Monique, Kumar for this order. So just in 1 minute or less, what's one thing everyone on this phone can do, a phone, whatever we're on, this platform. Fatima, take it away.
Sure. I have a very clear ask for our audience here as I explained to you all my own experiences and difficulty navigating and trying to push policies. So when the pandemic started, we began what's called Project Protect Food Systems Workers. I'm dropping the link in here for you all because we needed to stand in our privilege as we knew, even as farmers, as difficult as it is, we knew that our ag workers would not be receiving any relief. And so we started that, and for the first time here in Colorado history, we have put forward the first ag worker protection bill, SB 21-087. I need people to help move this. We need the power of the people now. There's people with big money and lobbyists and people who are coming in. We did the work of getting this policy there, and now I need help from the community that supports this. And the intent of this bill is to offer basic protections that most people in labor already receive. Agricultural workers were excluded from the National Labor Relations Act in the 30s because of racism that was evident in their own opinions and the New Deal era. And so we're just trying to get some basic protections for these people. So please check it out. All the information when you link on Project Protect will be there, and feel free to write us and we're happy to send out information for that. But please help us in honoring these people and not just calling them heroes. And let's do something to put our values where we say they are. So that would be my ask.
Tangible and immediate. Thank you, Fatima. And thank you for the link. And yes, I see my coworker Terry is going to put the actual bill link in here in a minute as well. So you'll have lots of resources here. So Kate, please, what's something we each could do?
I think mine's like zooming out from what Fatima said, and that is get to know the structure of how policy is made. Because I think policy in itself, and we've gone through this in years of organizing with young farmers, it can feel very intangible. It can feel like it's done over there, you know, in a room, and you don't know how to get in that room. And there are many folks and many organizations who figure out how to get you in that room and demystify what the policymaking process is. So I think that's number one, learn the structures, link up with people who have figured out where the doors are in that structure. This should be a participatory process. This should be a process that engages the impacted parties. It doesn't always by any means whatsoever, and that takes getting involved on both ends. So I think the more that you know how the minutia, the ins and outs of where policy gets developed, how it gets passed, what all those steps look like, how you can get involved, the more empowered that our communities can be to help shape the policies that will impact them.
Thank you. And to you, Monique.
One thing that I would ask listeners to do, and this is going to be kind of in a different vein from what others have said, but I would ask that you take some time to either look in the mirror or sit with yourself and say out loud what it is that you want for your food systems change, and say it as many times as you need to say it so that you feel confident and it's coming from your heart space, so that when someone asks you or you find an opportunity, that microphone is yours or you're in that room, it's natural. And you're really able to just represent what it is that you and your community want. And it takes some time to get comfortable with those words, especially if you're not used to being on the mic, like some folks might have more experience doing. So a little bit of practice and connecting the head and the heart, I think, is what I would ask.
I'm going to do that. Thanks, Monique. And Kumar.
Yeah, I think I would say it's sort of to Kate's point. I think is that you know, the policy can seem, you know, like this black box or a mysterious process, but it doesn't have to be. And I guess a different way to take that is that also I think often people think about the policy that's made in DC, right, in Congress, and that there are, depending on the issue, actually the more relevant level of decision making and where the policy at question is being decided is maybe in your state capital or in your city council, or sort of a more local level, and just encourage people to think not just about the policy that happens here in DC, where I am, but in your home states and in your towns as well.
Will do. Thank you, Kumar. Thank you, all of you, for spending this afternoon with us and sharing so much of your time and your insights. And not shockingly, we have about 5 minutes left for a whole lot of really, really interesting and compelling questions. So just a note to everyone on the line now is that we will not be able to get to all of these questions. I really appreciate the thought you put into them. As I said in the beginning, I wish we had 2 hours to just actually have a conversation. We should do that next time. So we've compiled all of these questions. We will follow up on all of them, and speakers, I may be following up with you to see if there's maybe that we can specifically follow up on. We will try to do sort of an email response to some of these questions that we don't get to today. So thank you all for your input. A couple of questions we want to address. Monique, I'm going to start with you. Also, lots of love and support coming in from all over for your leadership. And also, there's a few questions in the vein of sort of like specifically, how do you do this? And you started already a little bit with this, but specifically, how are you working with residents to sort of build their skills and build their comfort and really engage in this policy work?
Yeah, the Pueblo Food Project is fortunate enough to have a grip of interested folks, interested community members participating. So we get a lot of variety of voice. And we use that variety of voice to kind of pull out themes and come together with some, I would say, key talking points. Right now we have our top 5 sort of priorities in each of our work areas. And those priorities were created through community participation process, and the wordsmithing, although it takes time, was done through community participation process. And then we practice. We buddy up, we run different exercises, we do deeper learnings on why each word is there. For example, when we talk about increasing access to fresh and local foods, we do a chunk of learning on what the word access means and how that is different from availability, and what geolocation means, and what, the economic impact of access means. So we give folks the tools to feel comfortable in representing, so that what they're saying becomes authentic for them. And I think one way that you can get more familiar is if there's something that's really resonating with you, break it down. Don't expect that you're gonna resonate with it right away if you don't completely understand what is being said. And if you don't get it, question it and do the dialogue. And again, just saying it out loud sometimes really does help you feel more confident in what it is you're saying. So I would say take time to understand it if it's something you're curious about, and then ask someone to work with you. Like, hey, can I pitch this to you? Does this sound right? How could I say this in a way that more people would understand? Or how could I say this in a way that's more convincing? Because a lot of the time that's what advocacy work is, right? You're trying to convince someone that what you want is what should be done. So working on that with a buddy, maybe.
Love it. Other panelists, anyone else want to respond to that? So a specific question probably to Commissioner Greenberg here is about really keeping processing. How do we work with you and the USDA to keep processing in the state and sort of keep that as sort of a local economic driver? What can we do about that?
Yeah, that's like front and center question right now through COVID, of course. Just off our National Association meeting this morning, where processing was, square in the middle of what all the states across the country are thinking. It's been square in the middle for us. first thing out the gates, the governor allocated $2 million of CARES Act funding for producers, intermediaries, and processors in December. So $1.68 million went out the door in December. 15 processors received grants from that funding from the state of Colorado. We've used the margin of that $2 million to seed a processors and manufacturers grant program, which has yet to be announced, but is coming soon. And that is an effort to, and it's really an expansive definition of processing. So of course we saw the breakdown with meat processing and just the overwhelming demand on the small and mid-scale side. But this could be broader than that. We know a lot of producers don't have a revenue stream for seconds, for example. So could there be processing that takes what's now waste and turns it into a marketable product? So where we're building from here, we're advocating, like I mentioned, for infrastructure investments with future stimulus dollars. And of course, infrastructure, we tend to think of transportation infrastructure, but we're advocating for ag infrastructure. So, processing, storage, distribution, brick and mortar build outs that create jobs in construction to expand processing capacity, but then also orient the food system to be, again, more diversified, more independent, more small and local businesses across the state. And that ideally, help open up opportunities on then both ends of the supply chain for producers and for consumers. So hopefully, knock on wood, much more to come.
I love it. Thank you. Any other thoughts or responses on that one? Okay. I'm trying to eke in like one last question. I have like 2 minutes at the end. But so Fatima, briefly to you, if you've seen any really rich examples of how people are really working to keep money locally in ways that are really supporting food sovereignty.
Sure, I think a big important thing is local procurement models, as we see a lot of money that's going into food relief. We know that when we pair it with actually paying farmers, it only boosts our local economies and helps money circulate there, especially during times of a pandemic. And I think that the most heartening thing that I've really seen is just people on the ground doing the work, connecting. The meanings of partnership has taken a really different meaning on right now for those of us who work and are seeing hunger rising, and we have to be so creative and support and help each other. And this year has been a blessing in so many ways. I have had the assistance of Monique, who contacted me from a call and knew that we were serving people out in her area and helped us. So it's just about these human connections. We can't wait for anybody to serve our populations, especially with good food, and especially as BIPOC communities, as we see what's happening with COVID and hunger rates. We talked about the rate for most Coloradans, but what's happening for Latinx and Black populations is reaching over 50%. And so we have to rely on ourselves and not wait for people. And so I'm grateful for all the partnerships that I've had this year.
And we are grateful for you. So if there's any in, 30 seconds to 1 minute, Kumar, there's a really big comment question here about really about looking at the Farm Bill, right? So the question is, the comment is, without deconstructing current elements of the Farm Bill, Big Ag will just smile at state and local's good intentions. So I'm just wondering, from your perspective, Kumar, knowing there's a Farm Bill 2023 coming soon, what does this look like? How we as like sort of local and small are really going to have a voice? What is this going to look like in the next Farm Bill? What can we do? Big question.
Yeah, good question. I think, wow. I think that the local food and local food systems work is, I think we've even just seen it over the past few Farm Bills, right? Like the interest and investment in those programs seems to be growing, and even in the recent COVID relief bill, there was extra funding for local food projects. So, I think I would say just, continuing to, for groups that are advocating on that, right? I think what is critical is to draw links to describe how the work that you're the outcomes that you're interested in, right? Like to try to connect those to the priorities of the decision makers and whatever is current, right? I mean, as we've been saying this whole panel, 2023 also seems like a long ways away, but it's not, right? And so, I think just continuing that momentum, and yeah, I think that there is growing even bipartisan interest in these types of programs, and they're all over the country, right? And there's a lot of interest in rural development aspects of those, and so just drawing those connections between rural and economic development and health and just all the different ways that we know that those are important.
Thank you, and thank you for fielding a really hard question at the buzzer, Kumar. Did you want to say something, Monique?
Yeah, can I add to that quickly? So something that comes up a lot, especially in the halls of Congress and USDA, is this idea of success stories. And never underestimate your positive outcome and what that might mean to your representative. So if you are utilizing a program and it's going really well and something super positive has happened in your community as a result, take the time to write a quick paragraph to your representatives and let them know that it's going well, because they use that when they are, when they're lobbying for what they want to see passed or more money to be allocated to a certain program. Those individualized success stories do make a difference. And sometimes we forget, we're very problem focused. Sometimes we forget to celebrate all of the great things that are happening, and sending them good news can be effective as well.
I love that. And that is a lovely, lovely way to close. And I fully realize it is 3:01. And I know that even some of our panelists and guests probably need to drop. I'm just going to wrap it up by sharing a few resources, at least how to sort of stay involved with us at Nourish Colorado. So first of all, just a huge, virtual, whatever, round of applause and great love to all of you, the four of you, for taking your time to be here. I deeply admire each and every one of you and look to you often for leadership. So thank you for being here and sharing of yourselves. First and foremost, we will send out the recording. And I just have to get this stuff out because it's being recorded, and I fully realize some of you have to drop. We just wanted to say there's a few ways to at least keep in touch with us at Nourish Colorado. Obviously, you all should be keeping in touch with each other as well. If you go to our website, nourishcolorado.org, there is a way to sign up for our newsletter. We will always have a policy section. You can read our policy blog on our website. One thing I already chatted in is that we are resurrecting what used to be the Farm Bill Action Team, now the Food Bill Action Team. Through Nourish Colorado, it will meet I forget if it's the first and third Wednesdays. I forget. I chatted in the links to sign up for the Food Bill Action Team. It's really a space to come and share and be educated about what is going on, particularly in the federal policy environment, but sometimes the state, and always leave with some action of how we can mobilize together and kind of break down, to everyone's point, how do we make this a little bit more accessible? So I chatted in the links to share and join us there. Lastly, I just want to flag too, for us here at Nourish Colorado, we do have a new website. We have a Get Involved page. We are slowly trying to get up our guiding values integrated into our website as well. We have so many values apparently that guide us. They didn't quite fit on the web page. So we're working on a design, but if you go to the About Us, you can sort of link to some of our commitments about how we want to do this work and approach this work with you all. Most importantly, there's also a link there for you to give us feedback. We really want to be living out our values, and we want all of you as partners to be telling us, are we actually living out these values? Are we not? And to hold us accountable. So please check out that new section on our website. We really want to do this and grow better and strengthen our work with you together. And that is all I have to say. I know we're at 3:03. Panelists, thank you so much. Is there any other last word or anything I missed from anybody else? All right. Go, be well, take care, rest up. Thank you all for wherever you are today, and we'll see you next time. Bye, everybody.